Would you like to create some elegant Christmas cards using your own pieces of watercolor artwork? In this video, we're going to be painting 2 watercolor designs that we're then going to turn into Christmas cards. But that's not all. I'm going to be sharing my tips and secrets for taking any small botanical piece of artwork or mini watercolor painting and turning those into stunning cards. By the time we're finished, you'll be able to create cards from your own work that are both thoughtful and refined. Let's go ahead and get started. So for our poinsettia painting, we're going to be doing the same thing we did on our poinsettia gift tag that we did in our last video, but we're going to add a few extra little petal leaf things afterwards. So let's go ahead and just start out the same way we did before. So do these kind of initial petals. These back ones, we want to have them kind of tipping. But what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to shift that over a little bit. Now this back one is shorter because it's tipping away from us, and so I'm good with that being like that. And then what I'm going to do is just come in here and do a few short ones randomly. So 1, probably 3, 2, and 3. So do you see those 3 that I just did and they're shorter? I'm going to put some smaller leaves on them because in the center there's usually some smaller leaves, right? Or petals. I don't know. They actually are kind of a fake petal, aren't they? They're not a true petal. Anyways, then we're going to come in here and do our larger petals. I'm going to just call them petals because that's what they look like. They're looking like petals on a flower. So I'm going to do this and do that. So you can see I'm just kind of trying to draw these in almost like they're leaves, but they are almost the same way that I would do a leaf. Okay, I don't quite like how I did this one, so that's okay. I'm going to leave it like that. I'm not going to have the vein perfectly aligned with the rest of the shape. And then one here, and then maybe one here, but it's kind of turned away from us. And then with our leaves, we can kind of have the leaves come like so, but I'm going to like actually let them kind of just work off the page. But these are going to be our green leaves. I might even draw a few veins on the leaves just so that I can kind of work around those as I paint, because I'm going to probably want a little bit of something. These leaves are getting so big. Once a leaf gets big enough, that's when I start to think about details on it. So on these, do we actually want to do that? I don't know. That's going to add, no, actually no, let's not do that on the actual poinsettia petals. That's going to make life so much harder. So we won't bother about like little veins in there. You can absolutely do it, but this is supposed to be fast and simple because you're going to want to make a lot of cards, right? You don't want to have to do a lot of detail on every single one. I'm going to use a slightly larger Artegria brush for this just because these are larger petals. And then I'm going to come in and just do the same thing I did before. So same thing with the pressure, only I'm just working bigger brush, bigger shapes. And we have a few more shapes because we've got these tiny little ones in here. I really got this one wet. I've got enough paint on here I can kind of bring it around with me to these other petals. You can see I'm not always staying perfectly in the lines. All right, so we've got those first 3 in there. And then I think I'm going to let this dry for just a few minutes and I'll come back and fill in the rest. So now that this is dry, I'm going to come in and do the remaining petals. So once again, I'm going to go really nice and fine at the tip of the petal and then press a bit harder for the thicker parts of the petal. But I'm going to leave little white gaps between the petals in quite a few of the places just to keep the petals separate from each other without having to add a lot of extra layers. One thing I will do to add a little bit more depth to this one compared to my other one is to go with this deeper red that I have mixed up here. You can see my palette over there. It's more of a burgundy red, and I'm going to drop that kind of into the tops of the petals where they're kind of meeting the other petals, or there's other petals in front of them. So like right here, this little petal is kind of, you could say, casting a shadow onto this petal here. Whoops, touched it. And so you can put a little bit of darkness there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a separate brush, I think, for doing that, dropping with the darker color. So I'll just grab myself another brush here and I'll drop the darker color in with that. So I'm just going to repeat this same thing on all my petal shapes, always varying my pressure from thick to thin or from light to heavy, and then dropping in this nice dark color when I get into my shadows. And because I'm working on cheaper paper, I might end up with some kind of funny blooms or cauliflower edges, if you want to call them that. And I actually kind of like that look, but if you don't like that look, that's where a quality paper like Arch's 140-pound cold press can actually help kind of prevent that from happening. Once those are on there, I'm going to just drop in some yellow and maybe a little bit of my brown to create my centers. So I'm just going to grab a bit of brown here as well. I feel like I kind of filled that in a little denser than I would like to, so I'm just going to come in here and once again kind of do the dab thing with the paper towel because I don't want it to be super dark. I might come in with just a little bit more of the brownish color, but the yellow is getting pretty dense. Might even be able to just use a little bit of red. I think I like that. Then I'll come in and do my leaves, and as I said before, if you don't want a chance having your leaves kind of bleed into your poinsettia at all, you can wait until everything's dry, but I'm just going to come in here and try and carefully put them in here and hope that I don't have too much leaking that I don't want. Threw a little bit of my gray color on there, but what I'm going to do is drop a little bit of red intentionally into my shadows. Maybe even a little bit of that burgundy because it's nice and dark. Don't want to do too much blending at this stage, but if you want to encourage it to move around a little bit, you can. I'll just speed this up as I repeat the green on the other two leaves. So green first, then a touch of deep red or burgundy. And I might just lift a little bit or drop a little bit of water into this side just so I lighten it off a little bit because it's a bit dreary and dark. And then I'm going to let this dry. For this next card, I'm going to start by drawing a wreath, or I should say a circle, which will be the guideline for my wreath. So I'm just going to see if I can get, I've kind of drawn myself 4 little dots or little lines here to kind of give myself an idea of where I want the edges of this to go. So I'm just going to try and more or less center this on the page. I guess it's kind of like drawing an ellipse, right? But this is going to be a little bit of an oval shape wreath. And then inside, I'm going to write the words, "Oh, come let us adore him." So I'll draw myself some guidelines, just basically 3 lines so that I make sure my writing is straight. And I'm just going to go around and do some branches. I want this wreath to be just a very delicate sort of grapevine leaf with some tiny little teardrop leaves. And so I'm just going to keep it really simple. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do the lettering first because I actually find the lettering to be the most challenging part for me. So I'm going to use, it's a really, really, really dark blue, almost a black color. And that's what I'm going to use, maybe a little bit watered down, but something like that to do my words. So, and then I'm going to use a stiff brush. But if you want to do any writing and you're not super comfortable with using a paintbrush, just use a pen. There's no reason you have to use a brush to do your writing. I just kind of like the look. And you'll notice as I'm doing this, my downstrokes are thicker, my upstrokes are thinner. If you're interested in learning more about brush lettering, you can let me know. I'm by no means a pro at this, but if you want to learn really beginner tips for brush lettering, I could probably share a few. "O Come All Ye Faithful" is one of my favorite Christmas carols, especially the chorus, "O Come Let Us Adore Him." But honestly, I love a lot of the traditional Christmas carols. I really like "O Holy Night," "What Child Is This?" I don't know. I'm not sure if I could say I have one that's my most favorite. What about you? Do you have one that's your favorite? All right, so now that my letters are dry, I've mixed up a few colors here. I've got my dark green that I was using earlier, along with this blackish blue that I did my lettering with. And I'm going to use these for the little leaves, and then I've got a brown as well for the branches. And I'm just going to come in with the green and the bluey black color and draw some of these teardrop leaves all around the wreath. Actually, I'm going to have one brush for water as well so that I can add a little bit of extra water to these so that I get a little bit of that kind of watercolor look. So I'm letting these be extra puddly so that I even maybe get a little bit of blooms and things like that happening. And I'll just turn my page around so that I can kind of get the angle I'm after without, say, dipping my hand into my wet paint. So I'm just going to turn this around and go over this quickly. And once I have those on there, I'm gonna go into my brown and I'm gonna draw some branches. I might wanna add a few more teardrop leaves, but I'm not 100% sure yet. So I'm gonna just come around first and get these branches on here. I'm gonna add a little bit more water to my brush here so that it's a little bit less intense. I want these colors to be just nice and flowy and watercolor looking. I'm just gonna throw a little bit more red into my brown. I think it needs a little something. And I'm just using some really broken lines to go around the outside of the wreath. And I'm also using the brown to kind of attach the branches to my little leaves here, but otherwise I'm just kind of being really almost rustic and loose and just letting the branches kind of sprout out in different directions. I might even grab this softer brush and just drop a little bit of water into it as well, because I feel like some of my lines are maybe a little bit too contrived, and that's because I was using a firmer brush, which allowed me to work drier, but I think I actually want a little bit more water in here so that it looks a little bit less controlled, a little bit more watercolory. I think that's a word I invented, watercolory. I might even come in here and just in a few places add a few more of these little tiny little leaves. I'm not sure. I just want them small, and I'm already messing up on this one. You know what I might do? I might pencil a few in just to see if I'm happy with my placement, and then I'll come in and add a few if I like that. I'm just gonna dab the pencil off a little bit so that I can see it, but it's not so bold. I don't know why, but I struggle with this kind of that final bit of composition stuff. So the pencil helps me just kind of play with it first and decide if I'm actually going to be happy before I go ahead and drop the paint in. So hopefully I will be. Then I'm just going to try and balance out the branches just a tiny little bit. I think I'm getting a little persnickety here. Hopefully I don't go overboard. And then I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to add one final touch. Okay, so the final thing that I want to do to this is add a little bit of sponge kind of painting around the edges. So to do that, I've got a rag here, and the reason I'm using a piece of rag, like it's just painting rag here, is that paper towel, as you know, kind of has its own like pattern or texture to it. And so I want something without a lot of texture. So this is just like old flannel, cotton, whatever. And I'm going to practice on this scrap of paper to make sure I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to go ahead and grab my water here, and I'm dipping my rag into the water first, just so that it's a wet rag. Squeeze the excess out here. And then I'm going to dip into this brown color that I've got on my plate, and I'm just kind of like going like patting up and down. And then I'm going to go around the edges of this. All right, putting a piece of paper underneath of this little scrap here. And then I'm just going to go with my dirty rag and just kind of go like this. And I'm going to change the positions of it because it's kind of giving its own little shape. I'll just kind of rotate it a little bit as I do this. And just go around the outside edge, and we're going to get a little bit of a rustic look to the outside of our card. I don't want to go the same way every time because it was giving me a little bit of a pattern, and I don't want that. I kind of like this. I don't like the little bits of line there, but I think if I move around kind of doing this enough, I think I'm okay because I didn't do that everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and take the plunge and do it on here, and just going to go kind of the same way, just kind of bouncing and just going around the edge of the page. And I can always dip into the paint again if I need to, but I don't want to overdo. And if I dip in the paint, I probably want to got a little bit goofy up there. If I dip into my paint, then I'll probably want to make sure that I'm not too dark and just test it again on that page a little bit. Okay, I'm going to just turn this a little bit so I can do this side. I think it's easier to, I think maybe, work this way with my right hand. Just dab a little bit more on here. Make sure I'm happy with how much paint I've got here before I go at it. I think I'm okay. Like I say, you might be able to just go straight in, but you might end up getting some like shapes that repeat. So that's why I'm kind of rotating. You can even move your rag a little bit if you need to, kind of like change the way it's sitting if you find you're getting some kind of like weird repeats happening. I don't like the repetition for something like this. All right, and there we have it. I really like that with that extra touch on the outside. All right, so for the supplies to make my cards, I always start with a basic white cardstock. You can buy cards that are already made for you, but I actually just buy Michael's white Recollections cardstock, cut it in half, and then fold it. So we got a quarter fold card. And depending on how you cut your paper, you can get a card that folds like this, or one that's folding like this. And I think both ways are actually nice. Now, when you've cut and folded your card like this, you're always going to have the dimensions of 5.5 this way, 5.5 inches by 4.25. And that's just a good number to have in your head because you're going to be using that a lot when you cut cardstock or even your cards and watercolor paper if you want it to fit this, or if you want it to just be a little bit smaller. It's just a good number to keep in your mind, 5.5 by 4.25, or vice versa, depending on how you're going to fold your card. And then for cardstock, I'll typically buy it in, okay, this is a normal size sheet of paper, so you can buy, again, packs of Michael's cardstock. The Recollections brand comes in that same 8.5 by 11, which is your standard size piece of paper. And I like the solids, but I also like to buy their larger paper packs, which are like the 12 by 12 papers, and then cut them down. And so that's what I have here. These are 12 by 12 sheets, and you can see this one has a very slight pattern on it. You can kind of see when the light hits it. And that's actually what this one was, and I've already started cutting it down for today's project. And again, I like this one because the print on it is very, very subtle. I do like using prints, but I either like the prints to be very, very subtle, something like this, or something that's got a little bit more of a stripe or a check pattern. You have to be so careful with really bold florals. They often clash with your watercolor paintings, and so I tend to avoid those. Oh, and then of course, okay, you can see a little bit of a shimmer paper here. I really like the papers that have the sparkle or the shimmer, and those are especially nice at Christmas. So I would just go to your local craft store. I think a lot of you guys are in the US. You have more options at your fingertips, so take advantage of that and just buy a paper that you like and that is also, like I say, has a nice print, but it's subtle. So for cutting my paper down, I do like either using a paper cutter. That makes the process faster because there's measurements on there. Mine are getting a little worn off. Or a ruler and scissors and a pencil. And there's no reason you can't use those basic supplies. I really like a see-through ruler with this grid, or any, ruler that's got a nice grid on it. But like I say, any ruler and pencil will do the trick. And when I buy my cardstock, I actually like cutting it down, or a number of pieces of it down, into card sizes right away, because that's the main thing I do with my cardstock. So I always cut things down into that quarter size card, or I should say quarter fold size card. So that's that 4.25 by 5.5 again. And that's what I cut these into. And yes, if you get a 12 by 12 sheet of paper, you'll get some extras, and that's fine. I have a lot of pieces in this size, and then I also have some scraps, and I use the scraps as well. So that's just a little tip. It speeds up the card making process for me to already have papers this size ready. Last but not least is to have some tape. I like two-sided crafting tape. It's perfect for card making, and I'll show you how I use it in a minute. Makes the process so much faster. You can also get two-sided foam crafting tape that's thicker. I actually even more than this tape here. I like these foam dots. They're just a smidgen bit thicker, and I just punch them out of here. And because I'm really stingy, I usually cut my dots in half when I use them, just because it makes them go further. You don't have to do that. And then I'll show you how I use these as well. Now, the most straightforward card that you can make is to just cut your watercolor paper the size of your card. So I cut this 5.5 by 4.25. I'm not going to have any extra cardstock underneath. I've cut that just to fit the cover of my card. And all I would need to do is just put my tape on the back and adhere it to the front. The card cover is done, and then I can just go ahead and write the message inside. So that's the easiest way to do a handmade card with watercolor. Well, you could actually fold watercolor paper, but I just find I like this. It feels a little less risky because I'm not like messing up a whole card if I just mess up a cover, but that's the way I work. A lot of times though, I'll cut my card cover a smidgen smaller than the card itself. For instance, often I'll take my card and then I will cut a piece of this colored cardstock to fit the card, right? So it's the same size as the card cover or the card front. And then I'll cut my watercolor painting, or I'll actually make my watercolor painting when I do it to fit just within that area. So I'll cut it like maybe 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch smaller than my card, and then I'll layer the watercolor painting on top of that. So that just adds an extra touch if you're looking for something a little bit more than just having your watercolor painting directly on the card cover. So that's an easy, quick way that you can make a card. And in that case, you'll have to tape this onto here, and then you'll have to tape the whole thing onto there, if that makes sense, right? But I won't bother taping this one together because I probably won't actually use it as a card. I just wanted to show you an example of a smaller painting on a card and using it as a cover. You could even use the whole layering concept just to make a tag. Here I have a small piece of cardstock that's a little teeny bit bigger than this poinsettia that I did in our watercolor pencil video. And this particular little flower seemed like maybe it was a better size to just use as a gift tag. And so I've cut it down, both these to the smaller size. And then I'm just gonna grab my tape again and just tape the back, and you can put those two pieces together and you'll have a little tag. And I actually don't even mind making a little hole in my piece, like over here, say in the corner, and then just tying it onto your gift, like with a ribbon or whatever. I've done that with these little tags as well. And sometimes then on the back, if you want to write a message, you might want to just put another white piece of paper on here, just a little smaller again than the red piece, maybe before you put the punch in it. And that's where you can write your message if you want to write a message on a tag. But I've done that for small gift tags. This is an example of a little gift tag I made years ago. I did quite a number of these, and I just went on a roll painting these little birds, but it actually was a pretty fun, easy way to make gift tags. And so that's just something to keep in mind as another way that you could go ahead and do a gift tag. A lot of the time when I'm doing a simple layer card like this, I tend to have a more complex painting on the front, and I'll have done it on Arch's watercolor paper. So the cold press paper that has more texture, and I will actually tear the edges rather than cut them. And then I layer it on there. And again, I might have a smidgen bigger than this. This one is a little bit smaller, but I'll layer it on there. And like I say, in those cases, usually I have a more complex painting on the front. So it really doesn't need those extra layers. I actually quite like the way it looks when it's just simple like that and the painting is a little bit more involved. But if I have a simple painting, then I might decide to do a bit more layering on my card. That's what I'm going to show you now. So in this case, I'm going to use a dark green. This is that pretty, it's actually got like a slight pattern of holly on there. And then I would put this on top, and then I would put our painting on top of that. It looks like this is just slightly off here. Okay. And then we could put our poinsettia like so, and this ends up kind of framing it a little bit, and then I could even layer it. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to layer this with using regular craft tape as well as a little bit of these dots. Okay, so first thing I will do is I'm going to tape these two together. So I'm going to turn my poinsettia over and put some of this two-sided tape on the four corners and maybe a little bit in the middle. Oh, and I'm going to mention, this particular painting is ever so slightly warped. I've kind of bent it around a little bit the opposite way of the warp, and I feel like it's straight enough. If you ever have a watercolor painting that is really bumpy, and trust me, I have, because if you've put a lot of water or done a lot of layering, this thing will probably end up quite rippled. And in that case, I make a sandwich of paper towel. So I'll put paper towel under it, put the painting, more paper towel on top of it, and then I'll take it to the ironing board and actually iron it with the iron. I'll even use a little bit of water, like just to mist the paper towel a bit, and usually I end up with this looking pretty straight. So that's something to keep in mind if you have a watercolor painting that's very rippled. It happens, and that's how you can get it straight enough for your card. But I'm going to just go ahead and use this as is, and I'll just quickly pull the backing off this tape. And once all the backing's off, this is now sticky. I'm just going to turn it around and tape it to the front of this. All right, and then to put it on here, I want to add a little bit of a raise. So that's where I'm going to add those little dots. So I'm going to go ahead, turn this over, and then I've got my little dots, or if you're like me and you're very stingy, you want to use dot halves. Then I'm going to pull the backing off those, and then take my base cardstock here, and I'm going to tape this onto here. Again, try and center it the best you can. I just eyeball things. Probably some of you would be more precise than me here. And so you can see when I've taped it on, it's just added another layer of dimension. It's just a little bit raised. And so it's just, I don't know, it just adds something else, right? And then you would tape this onto here. So easy peasy, you would just put tape on all of those corners, maybe a little in the center, and then you would tape it directly to the front of your card. And there you would have your poinsettia card. All right, so for my next card, I have this little painting that was from our watercolor pencil botanical video again, and I decided to add the word joy because I didn't really have a lot of extra space on it to add like a card with words. Sometimes I'll add like a little extra tag with words, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But anyways, so what I did is I wrote the word joy on here. I trimmed it down a little bit, and then I've got my paper here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this one. So this is my card here. This is actually not even cardstock, it's just paper. And so if I have a paper that's kind of a decorative paper like this, again, Michael's, this was a 12 by 12 sheet, I will put that as the base layer. I don't mind a thinner paper as the layer that's adhered exactly flat against the card, but when I'm doing layering, then I want the harder or firmer cardstock. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna use this paper, and I do like wood grain and stuff as a natural thing as well. I find it works just perfect with watercolor paintings. So just keep that in mind. I'm gonna go ahead, and you don't have to start by adhering this to your card, but you could if you wanted to. So you could go ahead and put tape on the back of it. And now I'm not actually going to peel the backing off right now. Let's just pretend I did, okay? Just so that we can move along here a little faster. Just pretend that's taped straight down onto there. And then I would add this next. And this is just another small piece of cardstock. And I'm going to kind of figure out about where I want it based on where it's going to land on here. So let's just go ahead and tape this together, and then we'll figure out our final placement. So this one has to get taped. Oh, surprise. One of my little examples, it didn't work. Now you guys see what happens behind the scenes. Jessica does some bloopers. I was trying to figure out what I didn't like about it. It was too many berries, that's what it was. So I'm pulling the backing off. And I actually have a smaller piece of cardstock. I should have clarified this before I started throwing the tape on. I have a this piece is just slightly larger than the painting, right? And it's actually gonna go on top of here, and then this on top of here. So sorry, I didn't make that very clear how I was gonna assemble this. So this little thing that's got the tape on it, I'm just gonna go ahead, put it right on here. And so you can see sometimes you'll wanna just make yourself almost like a tag. Almost just imagine that you're making like a mini card. So you're cutting something that's just a little bit bigger than your painting. So that's what I've done here. So basically now that's stuck on there, but it's not as big as a normal size card. And that's where you can add these other layers into it. So you've got a background behind that. And then this little strip will just add something to it. So I'll just show you what it looks like when we put it together, and then I'll finish putting it together. So it's gonna look something like that. Okay, so I'm gonna just do our same thing to this, put our stickies, because this is gonna look cute if it's raised. It could be either. It looked perfectly fine flat, but I really like the raise of these little round dots. So I'm gonna do the little round dot thing quickly to it. With this piece, I'm just gonna use normal two-sided crafting tape. I almost said two-sided carpet tape. I hope I haven't said that on this video. I don't know, it's so close to the tip of my tongue is to call it carpet tape. It's not carpet tape. That would be way too thick and ugly. I hope I haven't said that. Then, like I say, I'll come in here, and I kind of liked it around here. Again, you can always take a peek, like lay everything out, make sure you're happy with the placement. I tend to add like these, when I do like a little, you could pretend it's like a ribbon or something going across. I like to think about putting it, you know, above the halfway mark, either way, whether it's top or bottom, like below the half or above, maybe closer to a third. You don't have to be exactly a third, but something like that. That tends to look good. Then I'll pull the rest of these little backs off of my little piece here, and then I just stick it on top of there. And again, try my best to center it. Sticking it goofy here. Try to be very light until you're happy, and then just let it get on there. I feel like I don't have a good eye for centering things. Is that okay? Maybe like so. Okay, there you go. And there is our card, and you can see how easy that was. And just doing a simple little botanical, you can just add layers of paper, and it adds so much to your card, and it's just so cute to give. I have several cards I just want to show you for inspiration, even though I have not done these on my video. And this one actually you could easily do yourself, because I have a video of how to do this on my channel, And you can just simplify the process, do a few less layers than what I've done here, because you can see less layers on this one. Super easy for a beginner to do. And then afterwards, I just threw a bunch of glitter on there and layered it, as you can see. So you can see I tore the piece of my watercolor paper before I painted it. And so I've got that nice textured look, and then I've got it on top of a piece of kind of shimmery silver paper. And then this blue paper, which again, very subtle print in the background. And that's one thing I did for my Christmas cards one year that you could easily replicate by following the instructions on this video. Just do it in the small size. Here's another super easy idea because you know how to do berries and leaves. So you can see I've just got a small piece of watercolor paper. It's actually almost a perfect square. So I've done that little painting and then I've put it on a piece of cardstock that's just that smidgen bigger than the painting, right? And I put it kind of more to one side of the card. And this particular paper that I used, again, you can see the subtle texture, subtle print, nothing too crazy. And then I wanted to add a little something extra, so I did some hand lettering, wrote the word peace, and did that on a tiny little piece of paper that again had those kind of torn edges. Put that on another little piece of cardstock, so you can see like that. And then you can see, if you look at the side, I did the little dot thing where I've raised just that little word peace. So the word peace is taped to the cardstock, but then after the cardstock is where I've got those little dots. And so that's the one piece that's raised. The rest is put together just with the two-sided crafting tape. So that's another way that you can take one of your botanicals and put it together to make a card and add some words if you'd like to. And finally, here's a nativity scene that I did. And this is another fun watercolor painting here. Actually, a combination of watercolor and black colored pencil, which was super easy to do. And this is pretty much the same as the poinsettia in that I have the painting and then this piece of cardstock and then the dots attaching it to this purple piece of paper. The only thing that's really different is that the painting in the middle is just that smidgen bit smaller than the poinsettia, right? If you look at them side by side. And of course I tore the edges of the paper on this one. And then I have this card, and it's almost the same idea as what I did with the piece on here. I painted the word Noel on watercolor paper and then adhered it to a small little piece of cardstock and then raised it with those dots. And this is an example of a more complex painting where, like I say, I will more often do less layering, usually when a painting's more complex. That one I did kind of I did have the space, I should say, to be able to put the word Noel there. Sometimes you don't. If you've done a more complex painting, just let that be the full card and don't worry about trying to add extra embellishments or anything to it, because it can look really pretty to just have a painting on the front of a card. Now this card idea might be helpful for you if you're short on time. I actually put this card together using one of the cards from my Etsy shop. I sell printable cards that you can download and print from home. I actually got this one printed at Staples. I find their printing quality is just beautiful. So I had it printed there, and then I took some gold acrylic paint, and using a toothpick, I painted these little gold outlines around the leaves and flower. Super easy, but I think it's still quite elegant. And I've taped it onto this green piece of cardstock here, and then of course layered it using the little dots, right? I will include a link to my Etsy shop if you're interested in using any of my printable cards for something like this. The only thing to keep in mind is you'll want to print the card at a little bit less than 100% scale, just so that you can make it fit on the front of your little card here with all the layers. So just keep that in mind when you print it. If you haven't watched my Christmas botanicals in watercolor pencil or my watercolor gift tags, I think you'll want to check one of those videos out, because you can take the botanicals that we create on those videos and turn those into Christmas cards using the techniques I showed you today. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, that it enhances your Christmas celebration, and that you've been inspired to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!